This is Basic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. I first heard about the MicroEd software company when a member of the Atari community sent me a batch of educational cassette tapes to digitize. The tapes had titles like Maps and Globes, Punctuation, and Spelling Level E. Intriguingly, the tape labels said MicroEd, creators of more than 2,500 programs, preschool through adult. 2,500 programs? Why had I never heard of this company? I asked 4AM, a software preservationist specializing in the Apple II and specializing in little-known educational software, if they had heard of the company. The answer was also no, so I started to research. A 2-page advertisement in Compute Magazine, issue 4, May 1980, provided my first glimpse into the company. Look at all the MicroEd programs for the pet. The titles listed included Agreement of Subject and Verb, Run-on Sentences, Higher Same or Lower, Word Demons, and, oddly, Usage Boners. We'll get to that title a little later. Many of the software tapes were sold in packs, for instance $84 for a pack of 12 elementary school programs, or $49.95 for a grade's worth of spelling lessons on 7 tapes. An item in the Washington Apple Pie Journal 4 years later, January 1984, intrigued me. $10,000 educational software giveaway. MicroEd Incorporated has announced its willingness to donate up to $10,000 worth of software to any school district, special education cooperative, or parent group willing to establish a school-to-home lending library. No limit has been established on the number of grants MicroEd will make. The donation is not contingent upon the purchase of any MicroEd products. Thorward Esbensen, MicroEd's president, envisions the establishment of a free lending library of educational software for families. Less than a year later, in November 1984, the Commodore magazine The Transactor, Volume 5, Number 3, wrote that MicroEd had donated more than $500,000 worth of its educational programs to school systems for those free software lending libraries. So, MicroEd was established in 1979 by Thorward Tory Esbensen. Based in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, the company specialized in low-cost educational software. The software, written in the BASIC programming language, was available for Commodore PET, VIC-20, Commodore 64, Atari 8-bit, Apple II, TRS-80, and Texas Instruments computers. MicroEd's best-known title was perhaps Trail West, an Oregon Trail-like game. Mr. Esbensen died in 2012. I interviewed 2 of his sons, both of whom worked with their father at MicroEd. First, I talked with Kai Esbensen, the youngest in the family. Kai told me in an email, "My siblings had all moved out by the time MicroEd was in motion, but I lived it. Helping out with MicroEd was my first paid job in 2nd and 3rd grade, and I was still on the payroll helping out through age 22. My interview with Kai took place on May 28, 2020.
My memories are going to be a little hazy on some of it, on some of the more adulty, businessy oriented angles of it, but I'll just tell you what my perspective on it all. So my dad was the assistant superintendent of the Edina school systems in Minnesota. He has always been trying to create kind of automated or gadgety assisted sort of ways to teach students. He wants to, always wanted to keep students engaged and was very obsessed with just the way that you could use games and other sort of methods of engagement to keep kids interested. In the 60s, he invented a system called Windows to Reading, which was a physical card that had these like windows cut in it. I still have one I can scan and send you if you want to see one, just as an intro thing. But and you'd place the card with these little windows on a special booklet, and then you'd turn the card, and it would answers and questions would appear sort of in the windows of the card, kind of thing. And so anyway, that's just an example of like he always wanted to use sort of gadgety, fun sort of interactivity to engage students and create learning environments. So when the Commodore PET computer came out, he was able to get the Edina schools to buy like 7 of them or something. And we got 3 of them at home as well. We got the original, the PET 2001 system with the built-in cassette deck and the chiclet rainbowy pastel reflecto keyboard, which is one of my very first memories of typing. And he taught himself Commodore Basic, and he started making programs that did the kinds of things that his Windows Store reading cards were doing. And then he later realized that, the PET computer was more powerful than that. And he began kind of programming in earnest, doing all kinds of, English and, math, science, history. And he eventually quit. We sold our cabin to fund, we had a cabin on Lake Vermilion, and we sold that to fund his new company, which there were a couple companies in 1976 that used the word micro in the title. Microsoft was one you might have heard of, and Microed is one you have not heard of.
Right.
They both started kind of the same year, because of microcomputer, was the whole thing. And and so my first job was, so all these programs were being sent to schools nationwide. And so I was, as a kid, my job was to go through the software and find ways in which kids across the country could sort of mess with it, and then my dad would fix it. So I was sort of doing QA, and I actually right now I've gotten to be senior director of quality assurance. I'm currently heading up a QA department in Minneapolis. I've just always stayed with the QA kind of thing, and then that started for me back as a kid, just sort of finding, corner testing my dad's software,
trying to break it,
figuring out ways you could break it. Yeah. And then later, he got hired a couple other programmers who were more because he was 55 or something when he taught himself Commodore Basic, and that's a 1976, 1977 55-year-old. So that's old school for the old school, So very, very much, teach an old dog new tricks kind of thing, self-taught. But he didn't have the same knack for it as, other, legit programmers, legit coders. So he hired a couple other people to create software for him. He would sort of more direct, but the original Microed software, the first wave of stuff was all his own programming.
Wow. And then he hired other people to do more of the...
Yeah, a couple other people. And I'm trying to think of their names, and I can't think of them right now. But I do know their names somewhere in my mind as a kid.
Sure. And they don't seem to be huge program. 2,500 programs is a lot of programs, and I assume that might have been some creative accounting there, where if it was available for Apple and PET and Atari, it might have been 3.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly true. I do have some catalogs. I haven't looked at them in a while, but I know where they are, and I can kind of flip through and see. But
I would. We need to scan those.
Absolutely.
Please.
Yeah. No, happy to do that. Yeah, I was going to say that my one big find, and this wasn't really, so as a kid, I was trying to give advice, on how to fix the software and stuff. And one of the things, and we had a contention. So my dad was born in 1923, and back then, the word boner just meant like a mistake.
I was going to ask you about this.
Yep. Yeah. And he created a program called Usage Boners, which as a third grader was hilarious. And I told him, dude, you can't send us out to schools with that name. And he was like, Christ, that's what he would always say about stuff that he disagreed with. And he kept it. So I want a Usage Boners t-shirt. Like I want to, get the artwork from the software if I can find it somewhere and get a shirt that says that. But yeah, so that was, and he did have some my memory is that he did have some teachers saying you have to change the name of the software. I don't remember what it turned into, like English Problems 5 or something like that. But yeah, so Usage Boners was totally the joke in all the schools.
I was thinking it would be the worst selling program if parents were buying it, but the best selling program if the kids were buying it.
Exactly, and everyone would be disappointed.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, totally.
Funny. So so you're doing QA. So my question, I found an article. Where'd it go? Microed Incorporated has announced its willingness to donate up to $10,000 worth of software to any school district, special education cooperative, or parent group willing to establish a school-to-home lending library. No limits has been established in the number of grants Microed will make. And then I found a later article saying how many programs they had given away, and it was a phenomenal number. Maybe $1 million worth or something. So how did that work?
I wish I could tell you how that worked. I don't have the insight into that. I know that you've contacted my other brothers, and they would have probably stronger memories of that angle of how the environment worked. He was very proud of it, but I don't remember any of the details of like how it worked or how you applied or how the shipping worked or anything like that. After the pets, then the Commodore VIC-20 came. So my dad really hitched his wagon to Commodore, which was kind of the downfall of Microed. That was the issue, and he didn't pivot to Apple and any PC work until it was kind of too late. But because Commodore was a really good machine, they just ran their company terribly, and so my dad's thought was that Commodore was going to be in every home, and this was going to be the big, in every school, this was going to be the big thing. And so he ignored Apple and stuff until so the VIC-20 and then the Commodore 64. He had a lot of stuff for that. The Amiga, he hung on. Amiga was a great system. Kind of ahead of its time, in some ways, in its ease of use and its power. But it just wasn't. It just didn't sell, and the schools didn't want it. And and so by the time he pivoted, it was kind of like too late. Right.
I mean, the Commodore wasn't a bad bet. It just wasn't the right bet.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't mean any disrespect to the bet. It just was unfortunate. I remember sometime around 1981. The family bustling about because somebody wanted to buy Microed for some number of millions of dollars, and my dad putting his foot down and saying, "Nope, it's worth more than that, and it's going to be a big deal." And then that, of course, not being true.
Right. Well, I mean, because of his fondness for Commodore, the pet. I mean, he was right there at the cutting edge of having a software company in 1979. I mean, that's about as early as you could do it for microcomputer software.
Yep.
This article says that Microed produces nearly 700 programs for Commodore 64, PET, and VIC-20, and 100 for the Apple II, TI, Atari, and Radio Shack. So there's the ratio there.
Yep. And I always loved it as a kid because whenever he would, a new computer would come out, we'd get one. And so we had, this is 1979, 1980, we had the house just with computers everywhere. And as a kid, that was really
you poor
a lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah, so I remember the TI-99 playing chess on it, and we had kind of before the PET. Actually, we had a thing called the Hazelton 1500. It was a terminal that you'd use to dial up with the cradle modem, the 300 baud cradle modem, and then that was connected to a printer called the Silent 700, which was a printer computer thing and you could play games on it, and it would print out the screen, and so you'd make your move, and then it would like zzz, 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 really. And I thought it was a funny name because Silent 700, but it was very loud with its dot matrix stabbing. Anyway,
nice.
I'm just thinking about stuff.
Sure. As
you're talking, I haven't thought about this in a while, so
I have that effect on people. Sorry. You told me in email that doing the QA was your first paid job in second and third grade. I'm curious how much you got paid for that.
I got paid $2 an hour.
That's big bucks for second grade.
It is. How every year, you get the Social Security, sends you your history, and it has those early dates.
He paid you by check?
Paid me by check. So
I mean, most dads would have just here's a couple bucks in cash.
Nope. Nope. I know. No, I got a real company check, and I got a bank account, and I put it in.
Oh man, I like your dad.
Bought a dirt bike with it.
Nice. Nice. So you told me about a program called Trail West, which seemed
Yes.
like a ripoff of Oregon Trail. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, all right. I mean, so family legend was that my dad had made this game called Trail West, and that he had met with MECC, who's the company that did Oregon Trail eventually, and wanted to see if they could buy it or something, and they declined. And then they came out with Oregon Trail, and it was this ripoff that went famous, and my dad didn't get any money. That was always been like the story. And then like 10, 12 years ago, I just looked it up because I wanted to see, like, how does that go? Like, when did Oregon Trail? Well, Oregon Trail was, the first one was 1971 is when that first came out. And then they did a remake of it in 75, and then started publishing it in 1980. But I distinctly remember my dad having a meeting with a couple of the mech guys. And so kind of putting it together, I think what probably happened, and the siblings all maybe have different takes on it, but I think that what probably happened is my dad liked Oregon Trail, wanted to do a version of it for Commodore. Mech wasn't interested, and so he met with them to see if it was okay if he could rename it Trail West, and is that a problem? I don't know why the story, though, is that there was a ripoff of some sort happening toward my dad, because it was clearly Oregon Trail was first. Now, another thought that another one of my siblings has is that my dad had seen Oregon Trail at some point. He had a kind of a flaky memory, and so that he may have seen it, thought that he thought of it, made Trail West. Then Mech came out to investigate to see if there's any copyright problems. Turns out the games are different enough that there wasn't a problem. And then my dad then re-saw Oregon Trail and thought that he had been ripped off. But I don't know. That's just another angle of it. But there was never any legal issues either way on it. And Trail West is very Oregon Trail-y, more educational, and because he put in like real, like facty fact things in there, because it was a history program. Mm-hmm. But different enough that there was no problem.
My question is, why was Minnesota a hotbed of educational software? There was Mech.
Yeah, I know. Control Data kind of had
Mm-hmm.
They were situated there, just south on the highway. I remember seeing the sign.
What was in the water?
I don't know. Something fun in the water. Yeah, it's a good question.
The company also did some educational titles: "Women in Ancient Greece and Rome" and "Women in Medieval Renaissance Europe."
Yes, and those were also tied. I believe those were among the ones that were tied to the Pioneer Laserdisc.
Oh, really?
My dad had set up a thing where it was interactive. He loved the interactivity again, and so the Laserdisc would be set up next to the system. They would play certain chapters, and then the program would kick in and then quiz you on what you'd learned. So I think that those two titles were part of that.
Oh, neat. Well, if you have those discs, I have a Pioneer disc, and we can digitize that stuff and get it working again.
Awesome. Well, the discs were like just ones you could buy at Shock Electronics or Radio Shack.
Oh, really?
Then, they weren't like homemade laser discs. They were like, he would take a program, Nova Presents, or something like that, and then. Yeah, I remember there was one that was narrated by Leonard Nimoy. I don't remember what the thing was, but Leonard Nimoy had some history thing that he did and was on Laserdisc, and my dad just took that and made it interactivity about it. So it was cool. Start and stop the system.
Mm-hmm. He was doing some cutting edge stuff.
Yep, definitely. Yep, and then he would program voice synthesis on the Commodore Amiga, just using the was DECSpeak, I think, was the chip,
mm-hmm.
part of the chipset that was used for that. And
might have been.
He had this whole vocabulary, or a sheet that he'd figured out different ways to sort of cheat the chipset into pronouncing things better than how it would normally talk if you just typed in the words. And so he had kind of this this reference sheet. That's the word I'm looking for. A reference sheet that he'd made where if you want to spell nose, you'd have to go, NNMEAUS,
Right.
Z or something like that. He'd have to do all this other weird stuff to get it to really pronounce it. But he was, so he was doing the voice stuff with the Amiga, I remember.
Nice. He also had a series of programs for the Commodore 64 that used the light pen, which was another cutting-edge technology.
Yep.
It says light pen microcomputer series of 80 program sets designed to provide students with beginning word attack skills that are normally taught in kindergarten through third grade. Entitled Point and Read, the series is expected to become popular with educators working in the field of special education, using a light pen as a responsive device for individuals with learning disabilities of one kind or another.
Yep, that's true. And he also had one of the first touch screen interfaces built for him, which was a wooden frame and then 2 membranes of cellophane-y sort of stuff with holes in it, which I think were capacitance sensors for humidity somehow, your finger. And then you'd Velcro that to the screen of the Commodore 64, and then you could touch anywhere on the window, and then your cursor would follow your finger. There was no pinching or anything like that, but it was all just point and finger. But he was starting to develop stuff for that, I remember.
Oh, cool.
In terms of cutting edge-ishness.
Nice. And maybe I should just talk to your brother George. You mentioned there was a software duplication company called Cycle Software. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's true. Yeah, I do. So George was he was sales in microed, is my memory. He'll correct you if I get any of this wrong, because again, I was like 12. But so yeah, he was a salesperson. It was a family business, so he was sales. And one of his first thoughts was, we're spending all this money getting our software duplicated. We should just buy the machines to get the discs. This is back for 5.25-inch discs. To get those duped. And so we bought the duping machines, and that saved us, that paid for itself. And then the machines were kind of sitting there most of the time. And so he thought, we could probably just sell also, we could dupe for other people. We could be the people who were doing the duplications, And so he set off and did his own company called Cycle Software. And that became much more lucrative than microed. Microed just kind of kept its little educational software corner, but Cycle did a lot of work for a lot of people and turned kind of big for a while. I think in terms of a small company, big. It was like maybe 200 people, maybe at its top.
Oh wow!
Like that. So I think that's my thought on that. So he can talk to you all about that and what the salesy stuff was like.
Great. What haven't I asked you about that time that I should have?
Wow, great question. I don't know. So I got an email from my brother Dan last night saying, hey, this computer software historian has reached out to me and is asking questions, and I'm happy to answer them. But, you, Kai, might be a better point of contact since, you kind of lived in the house during the time, which is true. And that I did tell him, though, that, my memories are maybe a little fuzzy. I don't have all the perspective, the grown-up business angle perspective that maybe your listeners would be as interested in. So, I reached out, I'm doing, figured I could do my best to help out. I do have, boxes of stuff, in terms of, old catalogs and letterhead and things like that I can certainly dig up and send to you.
I would love that. Yeah, I would love that. If you want to scan it yourself, great. If you want to loan it to me and I'll scan it, I'll get it back to you. That would be lovely because I'm very excited about that. Is there any chance there's any of the software left?
There is a chance that there is a box somewhere with cassette tapes in it.
Great.
Your listeners won't care about this, but I had a band in 9th grade, and we used a lot of those old tapes to record ourselves on. They were perfect. They were a little 10 minutes aside, 10,
sure,
11 and a half or whatever minutes aside. So we could get a good, song or two in per side of tape. So a lot of them were consumed just because we had so much overage of them.
Sure. I get that. If there's any left, I would like to digitize them because
Wow.
none of this stuff has been digitized. That's what I've been doing with all these tapes these Atari tapes. I'm digitizing them, and there's a team, international team of Atari enthusiasts that are recreating, making the software run again. And whatever it is, if it's Apple or TRS-80, I'll digitize it. If you could send a message to the kids who were learning from your dad's software, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Wow. Well, he really cares about you, your engagement in learning. He really wants you to succeed. His whole philosophy was mastery learning. So you couldn't get an A-. You had to get everything 100% before you could move on. And he was a big proponent of that. And he knew that was could be kind of annoying for kids. And so he wanted to make it fun so that you'd be inspired and encouraged to mastery learn.
Nice. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much, Kay.
Next, I talked with Kai's older brother, George Esbensen, who was a salesman for MicroEd and later was president of Cycle Software Services, a software duplication company that spun off from MicroEd. This interview took place on June 3rd, 2020. So I understand you were a salesperson for your dad's company, is that correct?
Yeah, I did. I had some kind of grandiose title, but yes, I was in charge of running the sales and marketing for him.
Okay. So I'd like to start before that, kind of before the beginning. If you could tell me what you know about how the company got started and what your dad's vision was and how you got involved with it, and just we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. So my dad started the company as kind of a spinoff from the work that he was doing at the Edina school system with providing, computerized education to kids in the school district. The thing that my dad did just to kind of, I think, show how easy this was going to be for people to digest, because you have to remember in the, late 70s and 80s, computers were a big, scary thing and not nearly as ubiquitous as they are now. And so to prove his point, he put computers in the first grade and started there with the computer rollout. Just to show how, easy it was going to be for people to navigate them, namely these youngsters. And so did that and began writing kind of his own software. So he was a self-made, programmer, at the age of 50-something. And then really started developing a lot of products and started getting more and more questions and demand for them. And then got some of his former colleagues or current colleagues, teachers around the country that he knew were subject matter experts in math and English and other things, and showed them how they could create software, and built these just tremendous catalogs of educational software. So, and his vision for my dad was always, everybody can achieve mastery of topics. It's just a matter of, it might take me 3 weeks and it might take you 2 hours, but we're all capable of it. And time on task was the big differentiator. And by having individualized instruction, which is something that he had worked on prior to the computer age, that people can achieve mastery and follow their passion and learn all kinds of great stuff and well educated. And so MicroEd was an outgrowth of that, and he tried to do a lot of cutting edge things with it, kept the prices low. We had a scholarship, kind of an awards program that we did where we were awarding $10,000 worth of software to school districts that applied for it and would talk about what they were going to do with the software and how that fit into their broader strategy of educating everybody.
Right, I saw that, and I'm curious about that. I found a couple of articles about it, one saying kind of a educational software giveaway. MicroEd will donate up to $10,000 worth of software to any school district. And then I found another article saying that it had given away, the donations had passed the $500,000 mark. So I'm wondering how that worked. How did he manage to make money by giving software away?
Well, I mean, not every school district got free software, just people that were, worthy applicants, and we still sold way more than we gave away.
Mm-hmm.
And the cost then was, the cost of the cassettes or the diskettes eventually, on which the software was distributed.
I see. So it was pay for the media, get the software for free.
No, you didn't pay for anything. I'm just saying that the cost of goods was
the cost to microed. I understand. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So who bought the products? Was it school districts? Was it individual parents? Who do you think was purchasing these?
So predominantly our market was school districts, but we did sell directly to consumers, and we also had a few distribution agreements into the mass merchant market, Targets, Bradleys. We had a big deal with Kmart and Commodore.
Oh, wow.
For this Commodore 64.
And when a school district was purchasing things, were they typically buying them in ones and twos, or were they getting the whole catalog?
Typically, they would buy like a whole grade level. So we had a bunch of second grade math, let's say, and our catalogs were divided up by subject matter and then by grade level, and then also by platform. So we start off on the Commodore platform, the Commodore PET, a PET computer.
Sure.
And then the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, and then we also had Atari, we had TRS-80, we had a pretty limited offering in the Apple marketplace and Texas Instruments.
As a person selling the software, just how did you manage that many SKUs? I mean, it said you have more than 2,500 products. It's
right.
A lot of software to juggle.
Well, yeah. Well, that was the big manufacturing challenge for us because we did have so many SKUs. So we kept inventory on the ones that sold. We had historical sales data even back then. And so we kept inventory of the hot sellers and the other ones we made to order because you're basically, at least for the cassettes initially, it was like making a copy of, your favorite road tunes that you and your buddies recorded, and then you'd put it in a side-by-side cassette recorder and, record from the master down to the duplicate, and then you'd test the duplicate. We did do some mass production of cassettes. We farmed that out to some companies. Then we had some of our own kind of medium volume capacity for cassettes. And then when the diskette business, 5.25-inch diskette platform got to be the media of choice, then we invested quite heavily in diskette duplication equipment.
And was that became Cycle software, is that correct?
Yeah, so what happened was we weren't always utilizing our all of our diskette duplication capacity because we bought for the peak, but or something close to it. And so in the off-peak, we would do duplication for other software companies, but a lot of them didn't want to do business with one of their competitors or perceived competitor and be sending us their master disks. So I set up a separate company called Cycle Software Services, and then we did all the duplication for all kinds of software companies, insurance agencies, anyone who was distributing information on, electronic media.
And that became a big business on its own, as I understand.
Yeah, I grew that to about $4.5 million, and then I sold it to some business investors, and I went to another company called Zomax Optical Media, which was in the compact disc manufacturing and packaging business.
Neat.
And that went public, Aztec.
What was the most popular titles? Do you recall?
Most popular titles.
I mean, was there a breakaway
Well,
hit?
Trail West was popular. Let's see, there was a little beginning math program. I'm trying to think of what the name of that was. I would say by topic matter, Trail West was really popular, but all of our beginning reading and math programs were really popular. And even popular at the retail level. Because that's who, parents were buying the software for, the ones that, for the schools obviously bought everything. I mean, they would buy the entire catalog.
Sure.
For a grade level on a topic. And our strategy was to be, the affordable solution. So a lot of software companies were charging $30-$40 a topic, or a title, and we were, our expensive stuff was like $15.99 or $14.99. We had a lot of stuff that was $4.99, $5.99. $477, $899.
They were not complicated programs. Many of them that I have found on the Atari, at least, they load in 3 minutes, which is great, but it doesn't mean it's a not a extremely complicated program with graphics and sound and stuff. It seemed like it was just there. Let's do the work. Let's learn something and move on.
Yeah, because the kids ultimately didn't care about the graphics. They would get engaged, as most human beings do, in the little game feature of the software, but they weren't graphically spectacular. And that was a very different thing, our software versus the other ones. Some of them were so highly commercialized, it was hard to tell what they were exactly teaching, if anything.
Mm-hmm.
And ours, I would say, was at the other end of the spectrum, which was they were very instructive, and kids really liked them. But if a parent were to walk by, they wouldn't, sit down and go, "Wow, that's great. Let's see the whale blow his stack again." I mean, it wasn't that kind of stuff. But when you'd watch these kids interact with it, either in a classroom or in their homes, they really enjoyed doing it because they got that immediate feedback, and they were making progress, and they were actually measurably getting smarter, more adept. And that was ultimately the key.
Nice. Did you ever use the software or test it or anything?
Oh, yeah. Our kids used it all the time. Smartest kids in the class,
I'm sure they were.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to remember that my dad was a pioneer in just educational concepts back all the way into the 50s. He was developing and really studying how kids learn and how best to meet them where they are so that they effectively learn, and then really just how all learners learn. In fact, post micro ed, he used a lot of that software in some of the most hard scrabble prisons in Minnesota to teach inmates who were previously illiterate how to read.
Wow.
Because it turns out that that's a big reason that people are engaged in crime is, they don't have any other skills, right? They can't read, they can't navigate normal societal boundaries, and so, they're an easy mark to get involved in criminal behavior. And my dad's thought was, and it proved out, and he spent a lot of time visiting and doing stuff, particularly in the Stillwater prison system, with using the software to teach inmates how to read and how to, improve their math and reading skills.
Wow.
Because, he was a guy that just cared about people having a fair shake and, being able to navigate the world through having some level of education.
That's wonderful. Okay, seems like the vast majority of the products were for Commodore.
Yeah, that was our flagship for sure.
Was that because your dad thought it was the best machine or what?
Yeah, I think he thought that was the best price value. That's the one that he brought into the Edina school system. And I'm not exactly sure how he first got caught up with them. But for sure it was a price thing. Apple was always a lot more money.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you have to remember that my dad's whole view of his whole lens was access and affordability for everybody. And the PET computers, the Commodore machines, the PET especially, was a very not very graphically oriented machine. The Apples weren't then either, but they were more sophisticated than the Commodore product at the time.
Right.
But they were a lot cheaper.
So what changed? You're humming along. You're selling software for Commodores and Ataris, and then what happened?
I would say that the market got more sophisticated. We had an opportunity to sell the business, and get absorbed into a much more sophisticated business model. And my dad felt really strongly about the business model that involved in, and despite his son's urging to let's sell and let someone else take it to the next level, he really was concerned about how that was all going to work out for, his mission of software for everybody and those kinds of things. And I would say at the end of the day, we just got out muscled in the market because the .com thing was, software was starting to boom. There was lots of venture money, and we're basically a smaller time player competing against, really well capitalized and well funded competitors, and that's a tough spot to be in.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So,
Yeah.
game, set, and match. And then Microed was around for quite a bit longer, but, its market share continued to erode.
Sure.
And it's just harder to compete in that market where you're no longer, you're competing against all the noise and all the resources of much better funded, competitors. That's just what happened.
Yeah, I understand. What do you do today?
Well, so then I took Cycle Software Services, did that whole thing, and then it's kind of a very odd story. I was also a volunteer firefighter that whole time, starting in the mid-'80s, and eventually my city decided to hire its first full-time fire chief, and I did that up until a couple of years ago, and so after 32 years, I retired from that business.
Well, great. Thank you for your years of service. That's incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an honor.
All right, what haven't I asked you about the microed years that I should have?
Boy, that's a great question. I don't know. That's, ever since we were going to talk, that's something I've been really kind of racking my brain about. And one thing about old age is you forget a lot of stuff. I think you've covered it really well. I think, if I would say anything, it's Microed is a legacy of my parents, both of them, who are lifelong educators, lifelong, super creative people who care deeply about, the greater whole. And Microed was really a very shining example of doing that exact thing, and not ultimately at the end of the day. And this is probably what cost them, maybe future incredible wealth. Not doing what was expedient and profitable, but doing what they thought was right for, the youth of America. And that's a pretty noble cause right there. And Microed is a really stunning example of that.
Excellent. Thank you, George. I think I have what I need.
All right. Thank you very much.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.